Hi, welcome to this awesome panel we have here today for you. My name is Vanessa Thornton. As you can see, I'm one of the organisers here, but I am from Wellington, so I've flown up today to be a part of this conference, which is super awesome. I'm a senior API developer for a company called Xero. Hopefully most of you in the room know what Xero is, but if you don't, it's a software, accounting software, cloud-based accounting software. And I've been working for them for the last 2 years, and I have spent 50% of my time working in serverless. So that's a pretty awesome opportunity. So we spent a whole year developing our webhook solutions. If you want to talk about webhooks with me, you can come and see me after this talk or during the break. Because I have a lot of opinions on that. It was an interesting experience building serverless applications for the first time, scaling out performance testing, making sure it's always available for our customers. So it's definitely an interesting experience. So without further ado, what I'm going to ask my awesome panelists to my right to do is just to reintroduce yourselves, because you've all spoken this morning and we've had some really good and interesting talks from you guys. So just a reintroduction of who you are, what you do for a job, and your favourite serverless component and why.
And why?
Yeah.
Is mine on? Yeah, it is. I'm Kevin Bays. I think it's official as a senior lead software engineer at Aurynn Health. What was the second question?
What's your favourite serverless component and why?
So I thought about this quite hard, and it's definitely Firebase. I spent a lot of time doing it, or using it, especially at my time at other companies in New Zealand like Plexure, where we did a lot of it for demos. And back when I was in Cape Town, in South Africa, we'd use it a lot for demos too. So basically a demo software, but the best demo software you get out there.
I don't have to say anything anymore. My name is McDonald. You just heard me speak. I'm a product manager. I mostly send emails. And my favorite serverless component, because I'm not going to say my own, it's one of two things. It's either Algolia, mentioned earlier, just in terms of like really focused product and great experience, or Auth0. I think Auth0 does a really good job of like solving this insurmountable problem of authentication and like plumbing it in really, really nicely.
Hi, I'm Aurynn. You heard me speak this morning on dev culture because that is kind of my thing. I am a DevOps culturalist at IARA, the company I started, and most of my job is sending email. It turns out emails are important. Funny how that goes. My favorite serverless component is probably going to be SNS/SQS. I really enjoy building like distributed message queues and things that sit in that and transform data. That's I think, the most fun.
Awesome, thanks guys. And just to top that off, I agree with Aurynn as well. My favourite serverless component is SNS, and there's a reason why. Simply because you can bang anybody's number into it and you can start spamming messages to them and they have no idea where it's coming from. So don't pretend you never heard that. Email, it will ask you to confirm that this is your email address, and it will send a person an email to say, yes, this is valid, but no validation on cell phone numbers whatsoever. So
this is how we build the new pager system.
Yeah, that's right. You can be very annoying and good April Fool's jokes to your fellow colleagues. So try it out next year, because April has already been, which is kind of crazy. We're already halfway through the year. Yeah, it's just gone so quick. So what I'm going to do is, I know that Randall sort of asked this question earlier on this morning, but how many people here have actually built and have production serverless applications running currently? Okay, so we got a few, awesome. And how many people here are just starting out, wanting to know more, learning? Yeah, so it's about a 60-40 split, about that. That's pretty good. So based on the fact that the majority of the audience are here to learn and they're starting to get hands-on, I thought I would put the question out there to my panelists, and feel free to jump in as you see fit and just answer the question. But we're here obviously at ServerlessDays, and we've been talking about lots of great features and functionality of serverless. But I've done talks before where it's like, how do you define serverless? Like, what is your elevator pitch? If you had to explain serverless, how do you define that? Because you Google it, and it's really hard to get a definition of what serverless is. Things come up for serverless framework, serverless architecture. There's just a myriad of results come back, and it's so confusing. You're just like, what is serverless? So yeah, I'm going to put that question out there. What do you guys think serverless is? How would you describe that?
Well, for me, serverless has always been about like the running of the code, the direct running of the code. So everything back to Heroku has been serverless. So serverless is, I don't have to think about the server. It just is dealt with. Code runs, I don't care about the rest.
Any other thoughts?
I have a three-part answer because I've been thinking about this a lot. It's even earlier than Heroku. So my current boss ran product at Heroku and now runs product for App Engine. And like App Engine has been around since 2008. And like it's been a long time, but I think you're right. So I kind of delineated it in three things. I have notes here. I'm not checking my email. So it's the most obvious one, and I think it's the one that everyone cares about because you see the blog posts about it all the time. I reduced my cost 99.99999% by switching to whatever. So I think first and foremost, it's an economic model, right? It's pay for what you use. So instead of a reservation model, it's all consumption based. And then I think it's two other things, though. I think it's a programming model. Mm-hmm. So source first is a huge one, and that's like the App Engine, Heroku, just deploy code and deal with building, and I don't care about containers or anything. But I think it's also primarily or predominantly stateless and event-driven. So your whatever your source code is ephemeral and may go away. So no sticky connections. Essentially, you have to chain everything through and maintain state in some other database. That is hopefully event-driven so that it can trigger new functions. And then I think the third one is it's an operational model. And so I think auto-scaling is a big one there. No actual active management. And then you need a bunch of that tooling built in. Right? You can't SSH into a machine to get logs. You need a logging service to suck them up and send them somewhere. So.
Yeah, well, I think it's a software engineering model, basically, but pay per use, right? I think that's the main benefit you get out of it. So it's not only are you automating business processes, but now you're not paying for them if you don't use them. So it's a software engineering process, and I can't expand more on what they've said.
Awesome, that sounds good. So based on getting into serverless for the first time, what was your eureka moment of when everything just clicked and you were like, serverless is the best thing since sliced bread?
For me, it was Heroku. Again, I'm going to keep coming back to Heroku, and not having to spin up and maintain a server on Linode again. At the time, I was using Linode for something, and I just needed to run some software. That was it. I don't want to think about any of that. That was the eureka moment. Coming to Lambda, it actually took a lot longer. We were still thinking about Puppet and maintaining these long-running reserved servers, moving over even further away from Heroku, and those legacy is the wrong word, but existing models around how an app should get deployed, moving away from those towards Lambda has been a much more complicated journey, I think. And this is the thing I wanted to mention with the beginning of serverless, is this is a cultural model where you're abdicating a lot of the design responsibility that you used to have to take up. This is no longer relevant. How do you architect your app? Well, like this, there is one pattern, and that's it. You don't get choices. And then taking that mental model on Lambda started to really work for me, whereas Heroku was a really good bridge.
Yeah. Does anyone else have any thoughts on that?
For me, it goes quite far back. It's back in the days when you went to a large corporate like Oracle or IBM, and you said, okay, I want WebSphere or I want WebLogic. And that offered you all the same capabilities, but you had to worry about the infrastructure. And then I sat there one day thinking to myself, why, as a health insurer, for instance, do I worry about the IT infrastructure? So I said, if we could just abstract that away and only pay per use, that would be an excellent business model, because we could focus on what we're really worried about. And that was my eureka moment.
That's awesome. What about you?
I remember the first time I ever saw Firebase demoed to me. I had spent, I think, 9 months or a year building this collaborative document editing software that literally was just, add the comments on Google Docs. And it was a total cluster. Nothing actually worked after 9 months of doing it. And one of my friends was like, hey, you should go and check out this demo of Firebase. really cool database. And I was like, I hate databases. Like, legitimately, I never want to see another database in my life if I can avoid it. He's like, no, you really should. And so the CTO of Firebase gave this demo, which was super simple. It was just, 2 screens next to each other that you draw on one and it instantly synced to the other. And it blew my mind. I was like, and this is like 100 lines of JavaScript? Like, you got to be kidding me. Because I just spent 9 months trying to replicate the exact same functionality. And so I think that was where it was like, these are just services. I can just throw data. Like, I don't have to do schemas or anything. I can just start using it. And that power of I felt very empowered as a developer to just I can just build something and get it working. I don't know if you guys struggle with it, but I spend a lot of time thinking about things and versus you should just start doing it and get something crappy that works and then make it better. Rather than kind of starting from that initial step. Because you can spend all day architecting things, but ultimately you have to get something that works.
Yeah, that's really awesome. I think for me, my eureka moment was I sort of got told, hey, there's this thing called serverless, and here's some architecture of how we're going to, separate these services out, because I came from a monolithic background working in banking previously, where everything was servers and everything was just big applications, and then I transitioned over to Xero, and we were looking at building our webhook solution, and the architect on the team was kind of like, we're on board with AWS, and there's this thing called Lambda, and it's basically functions and small pieces of code. And I was like, really? Small pieces of code? Like, I didn't even know this existed. And I was like, I put my hand up, can I please be a part of this project? It was like amazing. And for those who don't know, I mean, don't hate me, but we're like .NET Core developers, so we know C#. And when I saw that you could just upload your .NET Core application and have it triggered by data coming in off a Kinesis stream, it was just like, this is really, really cool. And then it's like the speed to market is unsurpassed. It was quick. We had our first test, our proof of concept up within like half an hour to an hour. I mean, that was unheard of for me. I was just like, this is something really special, and we should be encouraging people to get involved with it. Hence why we're all here today, and the community, it's thanks to you guys. And for those who are thinking about whether this is something they should get involved with, I think hands down, after today, get out your laptops, choose your vendor, have a play around, and promote it, because it is really the next big thing, I think. And that's a great transition to my next question for you guys. How do you deal with vendor lock-in, or do you think there is such thing as a vendor lock-in in this serverless world?
I have opinions about this.
Yeah.
But I've gone first twice, so if you two want to go first.
By all means.
I have opinions about this, and that is, yes, vendor lock-in exists, but there is no such thing as a lowest common denominator. You have to pick your vendor because you're picking your constraints at that point. You're picking, as I was saying earlier this morning, you're picking your context. And this is the set of choices that is going to affect every choice you can make from here on out. And yes, lock-in is very much a thing. Which services, how they work, how they interact, what their latencies are, what you can do with them. Even if there is feature parity-ish across clouds, each one will have very different models, very different mentalities, very different approaches to doing the same thing. And that will create more lock-in than I can't easily port my code. These are my opinions on this matter.
Yeah, I agree. But at some degree, you kind of have to abstract yourself away if you really want to get away from vendor lock-in. So for us, for instance, we're doing that with our domain models. So we elevating the business logic up into a domain model, and then we actually materializing whatever we need at the bottom. So but that being said, everything that we then build to support a provider, we then have to build custom. So at some stage, we do have to back a provider, and we do have to live with that vendor lock-in.
What about yourself there, Mike?
Yeah, I think yours is a great example of you have requirements that require you to run different places. But I think practically 90-some-odd% of people, it's something that they care about because they're worried about it, but they never hit, to be perfectly honest. And like it's exactly what you said. There are constraints, and that's just engineering. And a lot of times you want to pick a particular cloud provider because they have some service that no one else offers. And like if that is a hard constraint, you're stuck there. And honestly, like you're stuck there, but it has what you want and it solves your problem. And like, you know, I think.
And if it's a soft constraint, it becomes a hard constraint from there on out. Like once you've deployed to it, now it's a hard constraint. And now you're tied to that no matter what. But that's not an architectural decision. That's now a cultural decision that you've made.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And talking about cultural decisions, because a lot of businesses, upper management, will be making decisions about who is the vendor that you're going to be working with. Us, I mean, if you work for a large organisation, us as software developers generally don't really get a say-so in which vendor we're going to be working with. If you're a smaller startup company, maybe you will get an opportunity. I mean, small at-home projects, absolutely. You can run your applications on any vendor. You can pick and choose whether it's AWS or Google or IBM or whatever that is. So I think vendor lock-in is something that probably happens more in the corporate world, but that's just my opinion. Just because you've got people higher up dictating what the best things are for the developers, which is all an interesting concept. And it sort of like leads into my next question and things that you were saying in your talk there, Aurynn, was about who is on board with serverless in your company. So I'm going to put that question out there, like for each of you, who is on board and who isn't on board in your company? Have you faced any kind of brick walls being like, this is ridiculous, what are you talking about? Servers are the way to go and on-prem is the way to go. I mean, how do you face that kind of adversity?
I can start with that because the nature of our business, our brick wall is clients. Clients do not want to migrate over to the cloud. Once they do, then we don't have that brick wall anymore. But until that happens, we're constrained to what they have to offer. We can go in as subject matter experts and say, hey, you can get so much more if you move over to the cloud. But unless they're willing to do that, that's pretty much their call.
That's really interesting. Anyone else like face some adversity there or brick walls?
The adversity I face is, again, I'm a consultant, this is all client-facing, is a lack of understanding of how to maintain it or how to run it or how to, like as you say, you can't log to disk in a serverless, you have to do something, and that's something is outside of how they do things. So these are the barriers that I always see is we have a process, now what? Now how do I make this work? Now how do I fix this at 3 a.m. when my boss is screaming at me and the site's down and it's like New Year's Eve? And we didn't scale to 5 billion. What now? So those are the walls that I'm seeing. It's never a we don't want to, it's a we just don't know how.
I'm in a total cop-out because I work in an organization called Serverless. So like, we've been doing serverless for the past 10 years. Like, I would like to think that people are on board. But I think the biggest one that I see when I interact with customers is exactly that of like, we don't know how to debug these things. We don't know how to like, I don't know if anyone has done a talk on no-ops. But like no-ops is a lie. Like there will always be someone on call for, like I'm on call literally right now. Someone will be on call for something all the time.
So is there an SNS for that one?
I mean, I will get, yeah, if my phone pages, I will, yeah.
No, I mean, can I post
can you? There is an email that you can send that will page me, but okay. I will not tell you what that is. My coworkers have done that to me, and it's sort of funny. I was actually in a page review, and I was like, oh, there are no pages. And then immediately get paged because someone emailed that alias, so. Yes, it is a great trick. But no, I think that's the big one is just lack of observability and people believe that no ops means just like fire and forget, and that's not entirely true. I don't think we've quite worked out how to really run serverless things in production.
That's a really interesting statement, you know, yeah, because you've got to be on call and I mean, in my job, we've got subject matter experts. Unfortunately, knowledge does get siloed when people work on projects like that. And it's like when we have SRE and we have people on call, and if something goes wrong and with our serverless applications, it's always, well, who knows the most about it? Who's been the developer on it? Well, that needs to get deferred to them. Which, you know, I think it's hard to monitor these things. I mean, that's gaining maturity. I think, like you said, monitoring is a hot topic. How do you monitor it? Where the logs are? How is it performing? What does it look like under load? And how does it scale up? And what do you alert on? And how you do that? Yeah.
I want to you said about getting the developer who has done the most about it. Because a lot of this is experimental, it might just be the one developer, the two developers. Now what?
Low bus factor.
Low bus factor. This is the thing we have to think about.
Well, I can expand on that. So we have that particular problem. So we are heavily invested in serverless when it comes to things like DevOps or site reliability engineering. We have a team dedicated to it. And we use Lambda. What else do we use? We use quite a few things. And the problem is we get an intern in, they launch this awesome product, and then we have to maintain it. And then it's about upskilling those people. And once they've upskilled, then they realize the benefit. So it is all about that different mindset and getting them across the cusp, essentially.
Yeah, that's really interesting sort of, topic in terms of whose responsibility is it to be there when things don't go right and don't go wrong. And we're talking a lot about DevOps recently. So I'm going to target a question to you, Aurynn. How has DevOps changed from on-premise to serverless? What do you think is going on there?
Oh, there are so many things. Initially DevOps was like 2008, I think the term kind of came up, around automating strongly for cloud, but really about like the gradient of, as a developer, I am not distinct from an operations person. Like our skill set exists on a spectrum, and if I consider myself as distinct from them, I'm creating an artificial silo. I'm creating an exclusivity line for no good reason. As a developer, if I'm writing code, I have not written code until it's in prod. Like I've never run code until it's hit prod. And that's kind of what DevOps has really meant to me for a long time. So what I'm seeing with modern DevOps as we're moving into this kind of like serverless world and mindset is really forcing us to look at that worldview of like, why are we considering this to be its distinct skill set? Like even to this day, I still see this being treated as distinct skill sets. We talk about no ops. Well, why are we still framing ops at all? This is part of my developer toolkit skill set. I write code, I know how to run it. I have to. I can't run it if I don't know how to run it in prod. So that's where I'm kind of seeing DevOps going as we're going through this serverless movement, is more devs knowing more about how it's deployed, but also making the choice to take away choice from themselves, right? We give ourselves those barriers, those walls, that architectural worldview that we don't have to think about, because that's Lambda. It gives us that. Whereas before with Rails, you would have to think about, how do I architect my Rails app? How do I build this monolithic app? You don't have to think about that anymore. I think that's interesting.
It really is interesting, and talking about running your code in production, I mean, obviously you've got to be able to deploy code into production to be able to run it. So how do you think serverless CI/CD pipelines are going? Are they easier now because of serverless, as opposed to original sort of architecture of deploying code?
Yeah, I think deploying serverless on a CI/CD kind of pipeline is a lot easier because we were looking at package.json, and deploying a Node app or a Rails app or a Python app always kind of comes with that entire dependency chain build that has to be packaged up somewhere and dropped on a server. And hopefully, and this isn't like a Node or a Python or a Rails or any of these things thing. This is the nature of how deployments happen. This has to be glumped up and dropped on a server, and hopefully it runs properly. And serverless takes that and throws it away. Right? We don't think about that anymore. And containers gives us largely the same power, but it's that now we don't have to think about this. And that's a great thing to not have to think about, because that was, you look at those installer scripts and they're always a little bit, if I breathe on this wrong, is it going to break? They always felt really fragile to me. And I like that serverless means I don't have to worry about the fragility.
Yeah, that's really true. I have memories and stories of dragging and dropping code, like SSHing into a server and dragging and dropping code into the the root folder, the www folder, just to be able to like go, well, we just need to get this out in production, and this is the way to, not the official way to do it, but it's a way to get the code up and running. And now with serverless, it's we use TeamCity and tools like that to be able to just, one-click deploy and off it goes, and everything's really awesome.
I want to add on that with, like, it is one-click deploys and it is easy to get there, but I hesitate is the wrong word. I still worry that like the testing story isn't there and the full integration story testing isn't there yet.
There's no traffic splitting in a lot of cases.
Yeah. And that worries me, because we have really well-defined stories for that and really defined use cases, and now we don't, but we still have those needs. So it's,
It's interesting, but I mean, it's up to us as developers within the serverless community to start bringing the original architecture of traditional software development into this world. It's not about forgetting our roots. It's about bringing testing into the CI/CD pipeline and things like that, running those integration tests and then doing, canary deploys, and how do you manage rollbacks, whether that's a previous version of your code zipped up sitting in your bucket, and then if something does go wrong, you can have a chain inside Team City or something like that to roll that back, and it should be done within seconds or minutes. So there are tools in place, and there is ways to tackle that, but I think that does get forgotten along the way. So we need to be mindful as developers to sort of not throw everything away and get too excited, like code rules and everything else can just burn in hell. I mean, I don't think that's necessarily a good thing.
It feels so good.
It does.
I think that's part of the issue. Is it's at some point we've made it too easy, and so you can just kind of sling code and do whatever, and you're like, oh yeah, I might as well test in prod because it's easy enough to do whatever. And like, technically yes, but like probably not a great idea.
Yeah,
It's a great idea once, and then
Until you get burned by it.
and then you get burned by it.
Yeah, it is definitely very challenging. I mean, and that's always, you're always going to have teething problems when you embark on a new technology or something that's new and exciting. You're always going to have those teething problems, but it's just something to be aware of. And there's a lot of people out there who are trying these things and writing good blogs about it. So you just need to troll the internet and have a read around about how you sort of combat those things. So I'm going to now ask some questions to you, Mike. Why do you find serverless so useful? What do you like about it personally?
Yeah, I think the main one, going back to the story, like when I first started using Firebase, it's I get to focus on the things that my customers care about, right? And like I get to go up and make an app that just glues a bunch of like actual interesting functionality together, rather than worrying about provisioning things or doing kind of the operational overhead of that. And I think part of that is just because my job involves creating a lot of demos and doing a lot of the the glamorous things. But I think it is true. Like I've run a bunch of these. My demos typically run all the time and see traffic. And if I get on the front page of Hacker News or something, I have reasonable confidence that they can scale up. And like I'm not going to get paged in the middle of the night because something's going crazy. So it's just like the stuff that lets me sleep easier at night.
Yeah, and that's super useful. I mean, you always want that security, that confidence that your applications can scale up and then they can handle that. And then leading on to that, I mean, you said you've been working in serverless for a long time now, and what made you jump on that bandwagon? How did you sort of get involved?
Yeah, I mean, I guess like started using it in the App Engine world, and then started using it in Firebase before serverless caught on. And again, it was just like focus on customer. Like it's radical focus on solving problems rather than kind of this intellectual exercise of like, what is the best thing? It's like, no, we'll just make the thing, make it work, and then we'll deal with the consequences. And it seems a little crazy, but like I joined Firebase when it was a startup, and like that's what we had to do, and we were building this platform to enable exactly that. And I mean, you could see from growth curves, you can see from a lot of the serverless companies, like it is just so easy, and you can get a lot of developer growth, and you can get a lot of developer productivity. And I think that really, that's the thing that always makes me excited. Like I go to a lot of hackathons with university students, and just seeing what people can build in 24 or 36 hours that like, when I was in college, that was pretty much unheard of, to just go from, zero to something that we just built on stage, even, 5-6 years ago.
Yeah, that's really important. I mean, I guess the whole serverless development allows us to be able to rapidly prototype and participate in these like hackathons. I mean, I think they're a great opportunity to network and get out there and see what people are doing, because ideas and innovation, I mean, that's where most like startup ideas come from, is just people getting out there and building, and serverless allows us to do that. So I think if you see any hackathons coming up around Auckland or even in New Zealand, definitely sign up and jump on board. I mean, they may seem scary if you haven't done one for the first time, but there's always somebody there who knows something, and I know for a fact that Amazon run them quite regularly, and if you work for a bigger organisation, they may even come in and do it within your own company, and it's a lot of fun totally get involved with that, because you'll learn so much. You know, you sort of go, I didn't even know that this service existed and what it was used for, but now I can sort of take that and bring that back into my development team and see how the customer can benefit from that. How can we, you know, utilize that for our customers long term and make awesome products for them, because at the end of the day, it's all about our users, right? So that's really important. And Kevin, I'm going to ask you some quick questions now. I mean, what made you embark on the choice to use serverless development in the healthcare sector? Why the transition? Why the shift?
Yeah, so that was a pretty good segue into my answer to that, because I have given this some thought. And traditionally, health providers don't have this prototyping environment that they can do, and they can't actually get their features out to meet the customer's needs. And on top of that, how do we take those prototypes or those production systems they've written and feed that back into our product team so we can develop actual product features into the Aurynn platform? So how do we do that? And that's what Function as a Service, for instance, gives us. It gives us that rapid prototyping, feed back into our product team, and we actually build those out as features. So that was the main goal of our system, was to get that quick feedback.
So it's all about the customer feedback loop for you guys. And you found that super effective since switching over to building serverless applications?
Not yet, no.
Not yet?
Yeah.
Why is that?
We are still in the process of deploying to our first client, our new system.
Wow.
So that will come within the next couple of months.
Awesome. I'd be very keen to hear how that goes for you guys.
We'll do that.
And what is the biggest takeaway you've learned to date from just developing in the serverless world?
When you have to apply these approaches to on-premise and legacy providers of private cloud, I'm trying to word this nicely, but okay, people that run Windows, it becomes very hard to simulate this on on-premise versus people that run Linux and on cloud. So that's our biggest challenge, and that's what we're still busy working through.
That's really interesting. So because of time, I'm just going to quickly go into asking just a few more open questions about the future. Now, the future is always very interesting. Everyone has an opinion on this. So what do you think the future holds for serverless development in general?
Read some tea leaves here.
No one has an opinion? I'm sure everyone does.
I'll take a stab at this from the healthcare sector. I just think we'll see more and more adoption. I see, because as you know, a very interesting deployment I saw recently was from Xero, where at a click of a button you can deploy your analytics tooling on top of the Fire APIs, which is a standard for healthcare. So I think they're taking it forward, and then you get all the other providers like Google and AWS offering actual services that are very specific to healthcare. So I think once we have a very mature environment and people actually architect systems that are reference models, I think that will be the future for us in healthcare.
I'm thinking that the future of serverless looks awful lot like the Unix philosophy of do one small thing well. We're in this environment where we have tiny pieces of code, and these are not large pieces of code, but they can do a lot with a little, and they can just be plugged in to any I/O system. So we're going to see more and more things that are just small things, and then more things that are aggregates of small things. So if you build a small thing, like you've built your little translator application, cool, I can now plug into that on both sides and do something more with that. And I think that's the future of serverless, is instead of building like these big products like Firebase, we're just going to be building small things and linking them up in new and interesting ways.
I very much agree with that. I think there are kind of two things that I would see. One is actually kind of a direct thing on top of that, which is basically the like infrastructure as code, or like aggregator of those small things. So there are a couple companies in this space, so like Pulumi or Darklang, like some people are actually coming up with their own, basically distributed systems programming languages to try and do this, which I think is a little crazy, and like very speculative. But right, imagine if you could just say, new bucket on put, do whatever, and like, that would deploy, in my world, a GCS bucket and a GCF function with all of that stuff linked in. It will do, IAM permissions correctly, and like that is really going a step, beyond DevOps of like you are doing developer you're writing your code and doing your infrastructure, but it doesn't feel like that. It feels, infrastructure as code, it's just there. But it's also not, like the deployment manager or Terraform templates where you very much feel like you're managing infrastructure directly. So I think that's going to be, I would bet that that's going to be huge in the next couple of years as that catches on. I think a lot of it is going to be like super difficult and it may not catch on immediately, but I think it's going to be a really important thing. And the other one, going back to what we were talking about, you were showing with Kubernetes, I think we need a better spectrum across running everything from bare metal up to functions. So today, you can take your source code and like maybe you get a container image out, but maybe that container image won't run anywhere. And so I think we need a way of actually being portable, because there are going to be cases where you want to take your output container and run it on another cloud, and you should be able to do that from GCF or Lambda or wherever, and have that build product actually work well across things.
Yeah. I kind of object's the wrong word, but I don't think that portability concept works. Way back when I was still part of the Postgres community, we saw this a lot. Of open source projects would say, oh, we need to support MySQL and PostgreSQL, and all of these databases, like database portability was a thing that mattered. It never actually meant anything. It meant it supports MySQL, but only the subset of MySQL that we could guarantee is broadly supported. And so if we're doing that, if we're limiting ourselves to that which I can take to somewhere else, what are we doing?
I don't know if it's necessarily take somewhere else, but I view it more of like there's this like interesting distinction between like a function and an app, and like an app is just multiple functions put together, and like maybe it has different scaling characteristics, or maybe it's an app, you provide your own framework, versus a function, you get a framework from somewhere else. Like you should be able to have 3 functions and export that as an app, for instance, and like maybe because you want different scaling characteristics or something similar. Like it is just the different set of constraints that you have. And you should be picking, based on your constraints, not based on the name or based on those kind of like arbitrary, this is the subset of X that supports it. It's like, hey, I need to run on bare metal. Like Firebase was this way for a long time. We had to run on bare metal because VM network interface cards weren't good enough. And so like that was terrible, and then we migrated up one level. And now we're running on VMs, and like maybe we would want to containerize things at some point, and maybe we could run the whole thing in functions at some point. But that basically requires, at this point, a re-architecture at every level. And you shouldn't have to re-architect at every level, ideally. But again, it's the set of constraints that exist.
Each level will provide different constraints. And if you're having to re-architect as you move, then I don't think you can escape that. I don't think that is an escapable property of systems. That's all.
It's really interesting. We like always get to the point where there's like we get into like these really good debates, and then we run out of time. So we're actually over time, which is unfortunate. But I just want to say thank you very much to Aurynn, Mike, and Kevin for sitting up here and being interrogated by me. It's been fantastic to have you guys and your expertise and your opinions on the panel. So thank you very much for being part of today and on the panel, and all of the effort you've put into your talks. It's been great to have you guys along.
Thank you very much.
So yeah, that's the end of the panel for today, and I believe it's now time for our afternoon break. So if you just want to make your way out to downstairs and have coffee and a bit of a snack, and then we'll be back in here for the last part of our conference. So thanks very much.